Thanks, Rosie. I was just going to tell you, let's record this in case we want to do something else.
And Marcia, I can't see when I'm sharing, for some reason, I can't see the chat or attendees anymore. So when the time is right, I will let you kick it off and then
okay,
from there. Does that sound good?
That's great. Well, let's get it started because I think we have a lot to cover, and hopefully we'll have some questions. Thank you all that are attending today. We have created this as a attendee versus and not a panelist. So if you have some questions for Jamie, if you just want to put them in your chat, and we'll either unmute you or ask the question. So I just wanted to start off by saying that if there's somebody that can't hear anything or anything like that, just give us a shout in the chat. But to start off, we've got Jamie Hackbarth here from the EDA. One of the things that the Wasatch Front Regional Council or our Wasatch Front Economic Development District does is trying to get the word out about EDA funding. And this is a funding opportunity that is widespread as far as within our region. And so I thought it would be great if Jamie could spend, I don't know, Jamie, 30 or 40 minutes just talking about the program. And then if there are questions, either reach out back out to you or back out to myself, and we will get you pointed in the right direction. But this seems like a really great funding opportunity. So, the wording or the name of it or the title of it is a little bit confusing. And so I think that this is one of those where it's really important to let others know about this program. So with that, Jamie, you've got you're in the driver's seat, and I will watch the chat and mute myself now. So thanks.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much, Marcia, and thanks to Wasatch Front Regional Council for coordinating this as well. For those of you joining that don't know me already, my name is Jamie Hackbarth. I serve as the Economic Development Representative specific to Utah underneath EDA, the Economic Development Administration. And just for context as well, the Wasatch Front Regional Council is a great partner of EDA. They also receive Economic Development District funding every year and are currently going underneath their comprehensive Economic Development Strategy update as well, which I'll kind of touch on a little bit. But they're, what I always like to say, Marcia, is kind of that ambassador for EDA of getting the word out about these types of funds. And so today we're going to focus, I'm going to give a overview of the EDA Disaster Supplemental. And as Marcia mentioned, I wish this was named something else. I wish it was almost named like Economic Resiliency or Recovery. So basically this fund, eligible areas for this funds had to receive a major disaster declaration in 21 or 22 fiscal years. And Davis, Morgan, Weber, and Salt Lake are the only eligible counties within Utah that fall into that category. So how I like to see it, it's really a unique opportunity for those 4 counties to go after EDA funding that they normally wouldn't actually usually be eligible for, because usually our funds are based on distress. So just wanted to highlight that it doesn't need to be tied directly to disaster recovery, and we'll get into that and really the flexibility behind these funds as well. So diving into a little bit of what we'll go over today, I'm going to give a high-level overview of EDA, this specific disaster supplemental, some key updates in alignment with this administration, and then really how to build a potential strong application, and some project examples to help you put it into context as well. So EDA, Economic Development Administration, we are a grant-making agency that sits within the U.S. Department of Commerce. We are the only agency specifically focused on economic development, and we do that in a variety of ways, and that's through our grant investments. So that's really the common theme, I think, throughout this webinar, is that our investments are broad and very various in terms of the flexibility of what it can fund. So we can fund planning, such as feasibility studies. We can fund technical assistance, capacity building. We can fund programming related to business assistance, such as incubators, infrastructure development. That's a wide range in itself, as well as disaster recovery. And that coincides with this specific funding opportunity as well. I would say the biggest thing across EDA is that it is really focused on place-based and bottom-up development. So we like to see communities that are saying, this is why we need this project, and this is the goal we're trying to achieve. So that is why our large mechanism of funding is so flexible, is so that we can meet you all where you're at to do so. Specifically to this funding. Yes.
Hey, Jamie, sorry. And I just want to make sure that people understand that you have other funding. So make sure that you touch base on that while maybe not on this slide, but I just want to make sure that you touch base with that too.
Yes. Yeah. So, and yeah, that's a great point, Marcia. So yeah, in general, we have quite a bit of funding opportunities. This one is specifically tied to our traditional one called economic adjustment assistance, which I'll touch on a bit later. But we also have national funding opportunities, which is regional funding opportunities. So that's a great time to point towards the map on the screen here. So EDA obviously serves the whole nation. So we have national funding opportunities in which you're competing with applicants from all 50 states, as well as US territories for those funds. And after I'm off sharing my screen, I will put the link into the webpage where you could find all our funding opportunities, which is pretty robust at the moment. And then we have regional funding opportunities, which is where this specific funding opportunity falls. So that means as a region, Utah sits within the Denver Regional Office, which is the highlighted yellow part on this map right here, which means you're competing for funds with these 10 states, essentially. So with this specific funding opportunity, there's about 57 million allocated towards the regional office, the Denver Regional Office. To put that in perspective, that's about 4 times what we are allocated as a region on a normal fiscal year. So one huge opportunity for you all that are eligible for this funding opportunity in terms of the quantity of funds available, and also not everybody is eligible within the region. So that is why I think it's very exciting. And related to this funding opportunity, we are currently accepting applications. There is actually no deadline. It does cross fiscal years. The federal fiscal year is about to end next month. That does not matter in relation to this funding opportunity specifically. So I always like to say, apply when you are ready on your timeline. And that really actually does align with this funding opportunity. So that's kind of the basis of EDA 101. And that diving into the history of like why EDA is involved in disaster recovery, it is really based on the long-term economic recovery and resiliency. So sometimes we will be on the ground when there is, say, flooding or a tornado or a wildfire, and we'll be in those initial meetings with FEMA, but we're kind of we come a little bit later. So as you can see with this specific appropriation that I'm talking through, that's responding to declarations that happened in 2021 and 2022. So we're talking about projects more related to long-term economic recovery, rather that response that FEMA might be more adjacent to. Historically, EDA has been involved in this since the 90s. Over the years, we've invested over $3.2 billion in specific disaster recovery and resiliency. That has amplified significantly over the past couple of years with what we all lived through of COVID. EDA's budget did enhance a lot with CARES and American Rescue Plan funds, which some of you may have been a part of some of those projects as well. So going a little bit deeper into the specifics and eligibility behind this, as mentioned, 57 million is available right now at the Denver Regional Office related to these funds. Wanted to highlight as well, EDA's grant rates usually start at 50-50, and it's usually pretty locked at that unless it's based on distress. With this, as if you are an applicant in one of the eligible counties, you could actually request up to 80% of the EDA side with a 20% cost share. So breaking that down a little bit more, think a $10 project, just for simplicity terms, you'll request $8 from EDA, and you'd match $2 as cost share. Depending on project type, that could be cash or that could be in kind if it's a programmatic or planning grants. Cash is what we usually need for construction or infrastructure projects because it is a grant on a reimbursable basis as well. So we need to understand you have that cash flow up front. As mentioned, we invest in infrastructure and long-term economic recovery projects. I'll dive into a lot of different examples of what that means to us, so you could wrap your head around that in a couple more slides. And then eligible entities. This is across most of all our funding opportunities, who is eligible for EDA funds. It is listed there. So I'm not going to read it out, but to kind of sum it up, I always like to say it's basically any public government, so town, city, county entity. It could be a district organization. It could be a public university, or it could be a nonprofit as well that has political subdivision support. I do want to emphasize no for-profits are specifically eligible for this grant funding, or individuals. We do like to see for-profits involved, but they can't actually be the grant recipient themselves. And I'll take a little pause, Marcia, if there's any questions coming in as well as I'm going through the slides, feel free to interrupt me. I cannot see them, and I could talk through them while I'm going through, or we could save them for the end.
I don't see any particular ones coming in yet. So
okay, all right,
continue.
I'll keep rolling, and then
Okay.
So I've mentioned this. So eligible Utah locations. This is the major disaster declaration that makes the 4 counties of Davis, Morgan, Salt Lake, and Weber eligible. It did happen in 2020, but because it was declared in 2021, this makes you eligible. The Utah straight line winds fire. Or straight line winds, it wasn't a fire, it was a straight line wind. So sorry I put in fire because I'm usually thinking wildfires in relation to Utah and Colorado, but it had to be a major disaster. As noted, it does not need to address this actual disaster directly. It just needs to address resiliency, economic resiliency, which could look like a lot of different things to future disruptions, whether economically or whether related to natural disasters as well. So this is kind of your gateway to these funds, just so that you understand that this is really a unique opportunity for these 4 counties. There may be some other county representatives on here as well. There is the possibility, I've talked with this with Marcia, it could be like a region-wide project that may also benefit to Willie County, but it does have to substantially benefit maybe Davis and Morgan and Salt Lake and Weber as well. So some other counties may be able to benefit, but you do need that eligible geographic within the project as well. So eligible projects, going into this, I'm going to go high level and then I'm going to narrow it down. So we want projects to be long-term. We want them to be coordinated and collaborative across multiple partners. And we really want them to align with the overall regional strategy of the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, otherwise known as CEDS. Some of you might be involved in that process right now with Marcia and the Wasatch Front Regional Council as they're currently updating that. Most of the times, a lot of the projects that come forward naturally align with that, whether that's related to entrepreneurship ecosystem building, whether that's related to maybe capitalizing a revolving loan fund, or maybe building out some infrastructure related to water, wastewater, or transit. Many of the times it aligns with it pretty naturally. So wanted to just kind of highlight that high level of that we do look for that coordinated approach that aligns with the overall regional strategy as well. So project types, once again, wide variety. Walking through it a little bit, I always like to say it's kind of on a spectrum. On the beginning side of the spectrum of planning, somewhat of like the brainchild of a potential project, we can fund things such as, say, feasibility studies. If you have the idea of, say, said project, whether it's related to programming of, say, a workforce development training program, or maybe it's related to an actual construction of an industrial park, you could either do a feasibility study behind that to show that there is demand and due diligence for that. There is opportunity to do design and engineering. And there's also the opportunity to just do strategy development grants in general related to resiliency, which I know Wasatch Front led one of those efforts as well during COVID. Kind of moving on the other side of the spectrum, what EDA is more traditionally known for and historically known for is our construction grants related to restoring or enhancing economic infrastructure. So we can develop or construct infrastructure related to energy, transportation, broadband, water, and wastewater. I would say underneath the disaster supplemental based on previous rounds, we are also a lot more broad in what we might fund in this infrastructure related to our regular fiscal year funds as well. Many times we like to see our projects support job creation and private sector job creation or new businesses. So that could look like incubators, that can look like industrial parks as well. We do also finance or refinance revolving loan funds around the states. So that is, if that is of interest, happy to talk through that as well, one-on-one. And then lastly, workforce development. That is kind of a new emphasis of EDA particularly, in which when we're looking at workforce development programs, whether that's training, whether that's building out a campus to do training, is that we're looking for kind of sectoral partnerships coming together and saying, we have this demand for this workforce need and this gap. And we basically need this. So a project could look like, say, building out a campus specific to a niche, say, advanced manufacturing program or kind of need. And then private sector companies might say, we have hiring commitments related to that specific certification as well. Lastly, capacity building. That could look like training for the region related to disaster recovery. It could also look like hiring maybe a resiliency coordinator, depending on the economic or natural disaster as well. So some key updates, which I've touched on a little bit in this specific notice of funding opportunity, and just in general for EDA across funding opportunities, I think this rings true, are these kind of 3 investment priorities that have been emphasized across the majority of our funding opportunities. So on the right-hand side, you see all 7 EDA investment priorities. I like to say this is kind of like the framework and goalpost when you're maybe ideating of like, okay, what do I need in my county? What do I need in my town? And do I need funds for this project? And could I maybe ask EDA for it? I always like to point people here first and say, do you feel like your project fits into maybe 1 or 2 of these investment priorities? Many times the answer is yes. And we don't expect you to fit into all 7 of these. We expect you to maybe hit 2, maybe really strong, and really kind of hone in and have a strategized approach. Specifically, resiliency in the disaster supplemental is very much emphasized, and that a project should be resilient to future disruptions, both economically and both related to climate change as well. So within your region, that could look like, if you're building out an infrastructure, how are you potentially being resilient to potential earthquake if it's along kind of a seismic line, maybe wildfires, or drought as well, or floods. So building out infrastructure in a way that as well is also climate resilient. Across EDA, equity is our #1 investment priority, in which how is your project potentially serving underserved populations, whether based on demographics related to, say, minority and underserved populations in that realm, or geographically related to rural populations. And then lastly, it is emphasized as well, workforce development projects related to creating good jobs and in demand training as well. So diving a little bit deeper into each of these, just very briefly, many of you probably know a lot of this, so don't want to beat it too hard, but we define here at EDA resiliency as the ability of a community or region to anticipate, withstand, and bounce back from various disruptions to its economic base. So you somewhat define that for us in a way, and it could be economics, say maybe an industry is moving out, maybe a large employer has shut down, or it could also be very much related to these natural disasters and climate resilience as well. So all the disaster projects coming forward for this specific funding opportunity should be hitting resiliency. And this specific link down here gives you a lot more details and definitions behind it. And I will be able to send this slide deck out after with these embedded links for reference as well, and some helpful other resources to reference if you're interested in applying. As mentioned, what does it mean to be considerate of future disruptions? Really thinking of future weather and climate related risks, droughts, wildfires, etc. And then how are you making infrastructure and programming resilient through that built design or high impact weather as well. Looking out farther than just a couple, maybe just 1 year, but ideally like a decade out in terms of sustainability. So some examples of what this looks like. So economic resiliency kind of falls into these two buckets of either protecting your assets from, say, natural disasters. So one example in, say, Savannah, Illinois, is that we did fund the relocation of a wastewater treatment plant because it was frequently flooding and causing backup in the city. So we actually funded the relocation of that facility to relieve the flooding issue, is an example of that. And then the other bucket is taking advantage of new economic and job opportunities. So thinking of jobs of the future related to climate technology and green infrastructure. So example in Choctaw Nation, Oklahoma, in terms of diversification, is that we did fund kind of feasibility and analytical studies related to new business development and industrial parks that led to them coming back with a programmatic grant, I believe, related to kind of this drone program overall. So a little bit different projects. So it kind of shows really, I think, that like very diverse in variety we can fund, and that you can be creative. And that's like why I exist as well, is to talk with you at that about project ideas before you even pursue an application, to let you know, like, yes, this would be a fit, or maybe not, or maybe. And let's talk through where maybe that fit is with EDA as well. And I'm going to try to wrap it up here. So equity, spoke about this already, really just thinking about how is your project serving underserved communities. And we understand underserved communities in your counties may look different than underserved communities in rural counties as well. So defining that and what it means to engage them throughout the actual project. And workforce development, highly recommend if you are interested in doing a workforce development project, looking at the principles, because that it really does need to be industry driven, I think is the biggest point to get across there. So what makes a strong application? These are actually evaluation criteria we look at when you do apply, and that a review committee looks at. So one, thinking, is it feasible? Are you responding to the needs of community? Is there support from regional stakeholders, and are they involved? So we don't like to just see like one sole entity saying, this is what we're doing and why, but ideally some other stakeholders showing support from the project. That it aligns with the Wasatch Front Regional Council says as well. Fostering job creation, it's responsive, it's able to start pretty quickly. I'm not going to go through all of these, but because as it's kind of the wrap up of everything I've already talked about to date of really how we evaluate competitive application. Lastly, some other things you can talk about is one, are you potentially helping the region diversify if that's a part of the project? How are you benefiting underserved communities? And how do you align with investment priorities as well? So some just tools. Not going to go through this. I'm going to save this as a resource for you to explore should you want once these slides are sent out. But there are some really good tools for you to utilize if you are building out an application related not only to economic resiliency, but climate resiliency and hazard mitigation plans that you can pull from to help build your application narrative potentially. So next steps, if you're interested in applying, if you have questions, one, please ask them in the chat or unmute or raise your hand or whatever you might do. Determine if you're eligible. Hopefully this has helped to determine if you're eligible or not. If not, happy to talk. Think about what your community needs, maybe do some outreach. And it does not need to be related to that disaster. It could be in general related to your economic resiliency efforts. I highly recommend checking out our disaster page. There's additional resources listed. And then exploring some of the previous disaster projects. I just gave 2 examples today, but if you go, I'll put the link in the chat as well for reference. You could kind of explore, which might give you your juices flowing, like, hey, we have a project similar to what maybe we saw happen in Nebraska, and maybe we can come forward with that as well. And then I always say, please talk to me, please reach out. I'm about to put up my email, and that is a genuine thing. Do not just apply blindly. My role is to help you, to help answer questions, to help guide you throughout the application process, and ideally make this as transparent as a process as possible if you do decide to go after these federal funds as well. So that is it. This is my email, and I am available to do one-on-one meetings. I always like bringing Marcia in as well, so she is aware of what's going on in the region, and she as well is a great resource too. But please reach out, and I will stop sharing there, and happy to answer any questions with the time that remains.
So Jamie, just real quick, we have a question, and it's Cleopatra Louise said, what is considered long-term?
Long-term, that's a great question. So in general, EDA projects, also for your awareness, most of the time they're built out through the period of performance as a grant of about 2 years to 3 years based on the project, usually 2 years for construction and non-construction projects. However, we track the impacts of that project in reports with you as a grantee up to 9 years out. So even when you're applying and say projecting out how many say jobs would be created or how many businesses you might be assisting with your program, we always kind of recommend you projecting out about a decade in terms of that sustainability, although you might only be receiving funds for 2 years out of that 10 years is what we kind of look at in long term. And I see something come in the chat, one sec. I see a kind of question from Kelly. We are looking at moving into a bigger, more accessible space where we'll be able to host community education events, as well as more overall community involved events. Would these funds possibly work to help with the capital funding side of this project? Potentially, and it depends. So kind of the line is like, is it for just general government use in general? Or will it also be tied to maybe some economic programming, training programming as well? So Kelly, I would say let's talk a little bit more in detail about that project, because there may be a piece of it that would make sense. But in general, for like a county building, sometimes not, but I would say with this project or with this particular funding opportunity, it is a lot more open and flexible. So please reach out and we can talk more in details about that specific project.
So there's a couple of questions. Yes, Crystal, we'll send out the slides, and I'll send them out just to you, and it'll be coming to our whole list of people, and we may even put them on LinkedIn if that's okay. That's our social media platform. We do have another question in the Q&A, and I always think that this is a great question. Is there a limit to the number of proposals one agency can submit to, or should all proposals be submitted from the agency applying?
So meaning, can they apply for more than one project essentially as one entity? Like if one,
I believe that's the question.
Yeah, that is a great question and very common question. So short answer is yes, you can apply more than once. Say, I'm just going to say Salt Lake County, for example. If they had multiple projects they wanted to come after for EDA funding, they can. I would say being strategic about it though, it is not necessarily common that we fund the same agency multiple times in the same fiscal year. I would say this is a unique opportunity in which if you were, say, applying for an infrastructure grant and then maybe a programmatic grant, it would be more likely. than our regular fiscal year funding, just because we do have so many funds. So yes, you are allowed to. There is not a limit, but strategizing, and that's when it's really good to talk to me, because even if you do apply for, say, 2 or 3 projects, I would like to know, one, what is your number 1 priority project, so that we know on our side how that aligns in terms of if there is a limit to what we can fund as well. Because we do look at, one, how is it distributed geographically, not only within the state of Utah, but within the 10-state region as well.
I just briefly mentioned, you didn't talk about the range of dollar amount. So
yeah,
I saw that one was $2 million and one was, I think, $750 or $850 or something like that. So what's usually the range?
Yes, great point. Yeah, I missed that in my little spectrum talk I usually give. So going back to kind of the spectrum, on the beginning side of, say, like a planning brainchild grant, let's say feasibility study, that is on the smaller side of our grants. And it really depends on kind of the scope. So that can begin as small as, say, like 50K, depending on how specific it is, as maybe as large as, say, 500K. And I believe even that one was 750K for like a regional analysis related to diversification in multiple project feasibilities. So pretty broad on that end, but can be very small to like mid-range. In the middle part of kind of our program portfolio, so think programmatic grants, so workforce development training, think business assistance training, think business incubators. So maybe that's funding the personnel, the space, the supplies, the equipment that's needed to do that program. That also is a broad range. Depends, sometimes 200K on the small side, up to $1 million or more on that. And it's taking into account too the geographic footprint you may be serving. So that is why it's kind of always depends, and that's why the range is so large. Infrastructure. So this is kind of going to be larger than usual. So within disaster supplemental, because we do have more funds, our range for infrastructure projects is greater than our regular fiscal year. So usually I would say 1 million to 3 million for construction or infrastructure grants. I would actually increase that maybe up to 5 million. We've seen some $7 million grants within our disaster supplemental. So it is a lot larger than what we usually fund out of our regular fiscal year, based on quantity of funds and just what you might need. In general, a lot of times EDA is somewhat like a puzzle piece to a larger, greater infrastructure project. In this case, it might be more than that. So that's another big thing with this supplemental, is the ranges are greater, I would say, than our regular fiscal year funds as well.
We have another quick question in the webinar chat, and it says, a university is interested in establishing a remote campus in our community with a business incubator as a component. Would this project be eligible for this program? Funding may be needed for the site construction development. The public infrastructure leading to the site is in place.
In short, yes, that actually sounds like a very strong kind of EDA concept of a project. You could, and that's like thinking through it as well. What is, like, where are you at in the phase of the project? So if you need funds for, say, design and engineering, or maybe the feasibility of the program, you could come forward for, say, like that phase 1. If you're already there and you already have that due diligence, you could come forward for construction and development as well. And that's when, yes, I would want to talk to you in more detail. There are some other considerations in pre-award costs you take on as a construction applicant. You do have to do a preliminary engineering report, as well as an environmental narrative as well. So you take on kind of that pre-award cost risk as an applicant before applying as well. So wanted to highlight that. But let's talk Farmington City. I think that sounds like a very interesting project. Are there other areas in the 10-state region that are eligible for this 57 million in funding? Or yes, there are quite a bit of other eligible counties within the 10-state region. So I think like almost all of Kansas is, I think out of all the 10 states, there are eligible areas within 9 of them. So actually Utah and Colorado have the smallest amount of eligibility. But then a lot of other states actually have quite a bit in broad range. But we do like to see kind of like diversification throughout the the 10 states, which is why we're having this webinar to hopefully bring forward some Utah projects for this funding. So yes, you will be competing against other eligible entities from the 10-state region.
I don't think we've missed any other in the chat. I think one of the things that keeps coming to mind is that it doesn't have to be something disaster related. And so something more along economic resilience and thinking through that. The other, we tried to send this out to nonprofits because you mentioned that quickly through your presentation, but nonprofits are eligible, tribal nations are eligible, universities are eligible. And so if you don't have a project maybe, but you've been working with, let's say, a nonprofit to do some of this work, you know, maybe get together and let's try to figure out if there's a program that would fit this eligibility. So
yes, absolutely. Yes, nonprofits are eligible, and yeah, would love to connect with them. If some of you online that work with them and it's coming to mind like, hey, this nonprofit has been looking for funds for this and they're located in my county, let's talk, because yes, they are eligible as long as they have town or city or county support based on the focus geographic area of the project. So, and yeah, definitely highlighting that, yeah, if I could be in charge of the branding of this funding opportunity, I would not call it disaster. I would call it resiliency, because I think people go to like, how am I going to be responding to the straight line winds disaster that happened in technically 2020, but declared in 21. And I think it really, for me, this opportunity is super unique for your 4 counties. As Marcia mentioned, we have other funding opportunities, which are typically based on distress, based on unemployment and per capita income. Many times your counties actually aren't eligible based on that distress level. So one, this makes you eligible for EDA funding through this as well. And I am going to put also in the chat the link to all our funding opportunities for your reference as well. And if you're interested in talking through any of them, I am also available to do that too, because really just dove heavily into this one. What if we are a brand new nonprofit? So usually I would say we do like to see nonprofits that have had kind of some success to date and have some like governance and like organizational pieces behind it. It is not unheard of that. I mean, we have fun new nonprofits in the past, especially if they have pretty strong supports from their political subdivision. But as a nonprofit, you do have to kind of have articles of incorporation, bylaws, and a certificate of good standing, just at kind of the base level to apply for an EDA grant as a new nonprofit, which sometimes it takes a little bit to get those. But happy to talk with you as well through what you're thinking, because never want to say no outright. It's always kind of, it depends.
I'm just seeing if there's any other questions coming in.
I'm going to put my email one more time in the chat so people can just easily copy and paste that. And really do want to highlight, if you have a project you want to talk more in detail, reach out. I am available to set up meetings. And it's kind of the best part of my job as well, is to kind of talk through your ideas and see where it might fit. And it might not be for our disaster funds too. It might, like if you're doing an entrepreneurial program, we have a national program that might be a fit, but like this is a very unique opportunity for you all if you're within this geography.
There any other questions, Becca? Yeah, we'll be sending out. I don't know how. I think we could send out the recording. I don't know how we do that, but we'll for sure send out the slides for sure. If there aren't any other questions, I'm available too, as a local representative. And I think one of the things that Jamie did say is that if there's a project, let's say up in Box Elder, that wants to work with Weber for some reason,
Mhm.
and Weber is part of that, that we can take a look at that project based on this, because Weber is part of this funding opportunity. So oh yeah, sorry.
Oh,
We keep
sorry. I think I've been sending the links just to
to
host and
just, there you go.
panelists.
There you go.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, copy and pasting links and my email again. Thank you for flagging that. I'm used to Teams, so Zoom world should be, after 3 years of being remote, should be normal, but always learning. But yes, yeah, if you're in Box Elder or surrounding counties that might not be within the 4 and want to collaborate, don't want this to just nix this opportunity. And that is a big thing of EDA, is that regional collaboration as well. So let's definitely still talk. And even if it's not for disaster funding, we have other funding as well.
Yes, and thank you, Becca. I will send, here's my email address too. Thank you. That probably just went to Rosie. Dear goodness gracious.
Yeah. But no, yeah, truly thank you, Marcia. And yeah, I really want to highlight the work they're doing at Wasatch Front Regional Council and the Economic Development Districts, and take part in kind of this last month of the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy. They update it every 5 years as of now, I believe. I should know that. So it's a unique opportunity, I think, for you as their regional stakeholders to put your voice into this plan. And it's really kind of like the baseline level of really what we look at for your region, of how do your projects align overall with the regional economic development strategy as well.
Thank you. I really appreciate, any feedback to that. And we try to be very broad in some of our recommendations so that it fits just every type of project. Well, with that, I think ending sooner rather than later is always a good thing, to get a few minutes back to our day. I will try to figure out a good way to send out the recording and your slides, and feel free to send them out to others.
Yes.
If there are people that you think need this, and yeah, and also any feedback. So we get funding opportunities from the EDA, and this is kind of our first go around with a webinar. So if this is something that others would like to see more of, please give me some feedback, as well as anything that we could do better. So yeah, with that, Jamie, thank you for taking the time with us today, and all of you that were online, we appreciate you listening in.
Thank you, Marcia. Thank you, everybody, for joining. And yeah, we can all get 15 minutes back in our day, maybe have a early lunch. And I hope you all have a lovely rest of your Thursday and lovely rest of your week. But thank you so much. You guys are all the ones doing the work on the ground, and excited to connect with some of you further on some of your projects too.
Great. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie.